بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد إخوة الإسلام عباد الله. I'd like to welcome the brothers and sisters to another episode of Urban Duat Dialogue. And this is a series where we want to highlight the dawah efforts of brothers within the inner city and or urban areas. And as usual with every episode, instead of me introducing my esteemed guest, I'll allow him to introduce himself. So that leads us to the first question, that being, who are you and what are you currently doing in terms of dawah? نعم تفضل يا أخي.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah. So my name is Aqil Ingrim, born Kenneth Ingrim II, still carrying both names. I'm your brother, originally from the New Jersey area, but currently residing in Maryland and functioning mostly in the Baltimore area, although I am active throughout this region that they call the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia area. But I'm mostly active in Baltimore at this time at a masjid that is named Masjid Ihsan.
Now, so we want to go in to a little bit of your background, especially considering the fact that you say you're from New Jersey. Now, what part of New Jersey specifically?
So I'm from Neptune, New Jersey. Most people that are familiar with New Jersey at all, they know Asbury Park. It's a town right next door. So I'm from the area called the Shore Points, right on the shoreline there with the beachfront area and such. It's in central New Jersey, and it's about 40 minutes south from the Northeast Orange area and about an hour and a half north of the Atlantic City area.
Now, without a doubt, I have to ask this question, and that being, how did you accept Islam? Because I know in New Jersey, generally speaking, Islam has a strong influence depending on what city you may reside. So tell us about how you became Muslim. What was your journey like, and thus forth and so on.
Well, in my embracing of Islam, I come from more of a suburban area, and I was young at the time at the time that I actually embraced, I was 14, and was studying the faith for a year or two prior to that. But the short of it is that a friend of mine who I became very close with, a gentleman by the name of Isaiah Gaines, who now goes by the spiritual name Tawfiq. Him and I, we were friends, and little did I know that his stepfather was a Muslim. And with some of the things that he was getting into at the time, his stepfather was looking for a way to kind of tame him and guide him and prove him. So after trying many different things, sports and other extracurricular activities, martial arts, his stepfather just started presenting Islam, took to it very well. And him and I were together all the time. So everything that his stepfather was teaching him, he was also imparting to me. His stepfather's name is Abdul Malik. And in a fairly short period of time, I identified as being the truth, and took me a little bit longer to actually embrace it, because I was so young, and challenges that I had at home, and attempting to embrace the faith, because I was raised in the church, Second Baptist. So there were some challenges there, but eventually I took the step in and embraced it.
Now was that your only influence as it relates to Islam at that time and age? Because me, I don't want to say shocked, but I am taken back a little because I remember what I was doing when I was 14. And uh, to be quite honest, I mean, even though I had Muslim parents or at least a Muslim father, Islam wasn't at the top of my list of things that I consider to be important at the age of 14. And so when I hear about brothers out of Jersey and out of New York accepting Islam at such a young age, especially in this society, it's amazing to me. So I'm asking, was he your only influence as it relates to your journey to Islam, or were you seeing Islam throughout the general society, and there was some type of some type of leaning towards it, or was it by Allah
Mhm.
Ta'ala's tawfiq strictly from the advice and the direction of this brother? I believe you referred to as Abdul Malik. Am I correct?
Yes, Abdul Malik and his stepson, now Tawfiq Gaines. Yeah, between the two of them, primarily, yes. And I'm not going to say that my childhood was any different than yours, with things that go on at those ages, right? Um, but yes, I would say, shared, I was kind of raised in the church for a large portion of my upbringing with all that. But I reached a point where there were certain things that I didn't quite agree with in my upbringing in the church, and I decided that I was going to Bible on my own independently, and I said that I was going to try to follow everything inside of the Bible. So at the age of about 11 or so, I started reading the Bible from cover to cover. Um, but in that journey, I did come along Tawfiq and Abdul Malik, and that was pretty much it. To be honest with you, prior to or outside of the two of them, the only thing that I can really remember as far as exposure to Islam is the movie Malcolm X, for whatever that's worth. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's pretty much it. In my area at the time, there weren't too many Muslims around. It wasn't like in the cities up you go into New York and East Orange and go up even further north into New York. Um, it weren't that many Muslims around, and you had to kind of know where to look to find them. I did see a Muslim or two on occasion who I later was able to meet, but that didn't have any impact on my embracing the faith. So I would say largely that exposure from those two alone was best.
Now, I noticed you mentioned that you attempted to read the Bible in its entirety. Would you say that your family background they were heavily involved in Christianity? And if that is or is not the case, do you believe that your becoming more familiar with the Bible was somewhat of a stepping stone in, as far as you understanding the call of Islam and embracing the call of Islam?
I would say yes. I would say yes to that. And with regards to my family, um, my mother was much more involved with the church than my father. And interestingly enough, my side of the family is very heavily involved till now. There are certain churches that my family's highly involved in, and we have pastors and such, and run certain churches, that type of a thing. But yes, I would agree to that. I would agree to that. And my first exposures to the faith, it came by way of the Bible. And at those ages, 11, 12, 13, and the 14, um, well, since we're talking, I'll open up and give the rest. So at a point, my mother had some challenges with the church that we were in. So we stopped going to church for a while. And during the time that we stopped going to church was the time that I decided that I was going to read the Bible on my own, to try to continue my own independent relationship with God at that time. That was my mindset. And when I was first being exposed to Islam by way of Abdul Malik and Tawfiq. A lot of it at that time came by way of combating Christianity, if that makes sense. A lot of Bible quotes, the talk about the contradictions in the Bible, and whether Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the messenger of Allah, is mentioned in the Bible or not. And so at that time, I knew a lot more about the Bible and Bible quotes, and tilting that toward Islam than I actually did Islam.
Now, your struggles, tell us a little bit about your struggles as it relates to accepting Islam at that age. We know that there's probably a lot of different things that you had to adjust to, a lot of things that you may have had to deal with. Age 14, you would have to have been in high school. So,
I
explain to us
was.
some of the struggles that you encountered and that you had to endure and overcome uh, as a result of embracing Islam at such a young age.
Well, I learned a lot about my parents at that age, in some of their previous life exposures or lack thereof. And both of my parents were vehemently against me having anything to do with Islam at that time. So a lot of challenges in the home, a lot of back and forth, a lot of pressure. Um, I'll give you a brief example of how people would get at times. So I almost got kicked out of the house, right? Not because I was a bad kid, not because I was disrespectful, just because I wouldn't back wanting to be Muslim. And a lot of that pressure came from the direction of my mother. And as for my father believed that Abdul Malik, may Allah preserve him, had brainwashed me. And on in life, my father told me, he said, son, that was the first time in my life I ever considered killing a man before. So, so there were some tensions there. And my parents had prohibited me from going to Abdul Malik's house, which he lived around the corner from me at the time. And I knew enough about Islam that I knew I had to obey my parents. So didn't know where a masjid was, didn't know what a masjid was, didn't know how to pray, and I knew very little. Um, I was told that certain things. I know we were supposed to pray, didn't know how to do it. Um, I knew my parents were supposed to be above my ankles. I knew that there was a Quran. I didn't have one at the time. Um, and I had all these Bible quotes. So that's all I had to go on for a couple years. But eventually I had got a job, um, and I was working at Burger King, saved my money at Burger King, and convinced an individual individual named Carrie, who was working with me, to drive me up all the way up to East Orange, 4th Avenue, where at that time, I don't know if he remembers this, but our brother Abu Rumesa, may Allah preserve him, was just getting his start off at that time, what eventually became Authentic Statements. He was working with a gentleman named Zaid. And I had this, only thing that I had a couple of books and I had a pamphlet with all of these books inside this particular pamphlet. And I said, if I could ever get to the Muslim bookstore, I would buy these books. So for 2 years, I would mark off these books that I would buy. So I finally got there. I wasn't supposed to go all the way up to East Orange in Newark, New Jersey, because I couldn't go halfway across my town at the time. Wasn't allowed to, but I did. Spent the money, came back, and I have bags full of books. So as soon as I get home, my mother asked me, she says, what do you have in those bags? I said, books. Her face changes and she says, what kind of books? So I say, Islamic books. So long story short, she asked Carrie to go home and proceeded to put me on punishment for about 2 months. Um, but one of the books that I did buy was a Quran, and a gentleman by the name of Abdurrahman, rahimahullah. He told me that you're supposed to put the Quran in a high place. So I put the Quran on the top of my bookshelf, not on the bookshelf, on top of the bookshelf. So my mother took all the books from me, but she didn't look up the top of the shelf to see the Quran there. So I was sneaking reading the Quran at that time.
Now, how are your parents now in terms of Islam? I would imagine now, after years of you showing, improving, practicing, and implementing Islam, and it, having a positive effect on your character and thus forth and so on, I would imagine that they probably have a better outlook on Islam. But I could be wrong. Where are they at now in terms of Islam?
Yeah. So over the course of about the next, let's say, 10 years or so, we went from their intolerance to tolerance, and then them finally accepting that this is who I am, and eventually, mother apologizes for some of the things that took place during that part of my adolescent years. And at this point, they both tell me that they're proud of the person that I became because of this. So it's been a bit of a journey, but we're here now. Alhamdulillah.
That's good, mashallah. They don't look like they on their way to embracing Islam any day now, no?
Well, interestingly enough, well, we make dua for both of them. We ask Allah that He guides my parents, your parents, and all of our parents to the faith, and if they are upon the faith, to continue them upon the faith. But um, my mother is inquisitive, and it's kind of a big jump for her, I'll say, from Christianity to Islam. But she continues to be inquisitive, and makes efforts to understand. Um, my father, may Allah also guide him. And since we're sharing, I'll share.
Mhm.
He mentioned to me once that he saw the truth in Islam, but he wasn't in a place to give up um, some of the worldly challenges, we'll say. My father's a pretty well established and worldly person. So after explaining some things to him about the Fatiha, um, he said to me, he said, "Oh, so then I must be how your chapter describes." So I know it's the truth, but I'm not ready to do it yet. So I'm going to wait until I'm able to and ready to do it, and then I'll give up these things. So that's kind of where they are, and that was his understanding for what it's worth. May Allah guide us and guide him, and both of my parents and all ours.
Unfortunately, though, that's the claim that we hear a lot of people say in the society, that I have this with me, I have that with me, I like doing this, I like doing that. When I'm ready, then I'll accept Islam. Uh,
Right.
is as far as I'm concerned, that statement alone is a trick from the shaitan, because a lot of times when people, it's almost as if they expect to be at a certain standard and character and almost like perfection before they step in. And we're living this day to day. We're struggling day to day. We're repenting every day. All of us have something with us that we don't want other people to know about, and thus forth and so on. So, because I commonly hear people say that when I talk to them about Islam, that I know it's the truth, but I have to get myself together, and thus forth and
Right.
so on. But hopefully, man, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala will soften their hearts and bless them to enter into Islam. Uh,
Um,
the next question, because you're a person that is involved in dawah without a doubt, you're well known within the states. So the next question would be, who are some of the callers that had a profound impact on you as it relates to seeking knowledge and teaching? people who people involved in dawah who may have been more, somewhat like mentors and thus forth and so on.
Well, stateside, there's a response to that, and outside of stateside, there's a response to that. But stateside is actually interesting because at that time, the only, well, I won't say the only, but I'll say the primary masjid that was in our area wasn't in the town that I'm from, Neptune, New Jersey, but a town over, Asbury Park. And there was a masjid on 209 Bond Street, and it was called the Islamic Center of Asbury Park. We later changed the name. Partially involved at the time because I was very active there at the time. We changed the name to Masjid al Bayan, and it still carries that name today. Small place at the time, small place. In small town. Asbury Park is like 1.7 square miles, to give you an idea. But in 1997, Abu Uwais, rahimahullah, Sheikh Abu Uwais was the imam there. So I began building with him from that. And in 1999, Sheikh Dawood Adib becomes the imam. Also, his mercy upon Abu Uwais and continue to preserve Sheikh Dawood Adib. So the two of them definitely had impact on me stateside at that time. And in keeping with honesty, I would also have to add to that the jump from Asbury Park to East Orange was about a 40-minute drive north. And we were also frequenting Masjid Ahl Sunnah very heavily at that time, where Abu Muslima was and still is the imam there. So at that time, I would say stateside, those three personalities that I actually were able to touch and was learning from them, definitely more in depth and direct from Dawood Adib, Sheikh Dawood Adib, than the other two, but the other two did have impact.
Yeah, mashallah. Well, you know, because you're talking about mid to late or late '90s,
Right.
mashallah, which
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
imagine was just a totally different vibe. Because most of the brothers that, especially from from the tri-state area, were frequenting and or sitting with those three individuals: Abu Uwais,
Mhm.
Sheikh Abu Uwais, rahimahullah, Sheikh Dawud Adib, and Abu Muslima. Uh, you said in '99, Sheikh Dawood, he became the Imam of Masjid Asbury Park. Uh,
Yes.
was he, because before I ask this question, around what year was it that you actually went overseas to seek knowledge? Was it uh,
My first time out was in the year 2000.
okay? So you were frequenting the masjid that Dawood Adi was at prior to that.
Yes, Masjid al. Yes.
So I would imagine did Sheikh Dawood have some type of influence in encouraging you to go overseas and like this, or how did that come about?
Very much so. Very much so. But as it turns out, Asbury Park is a very small place, but there's so much that transpired there. That there's definitely a piece of history relative to Dawa and the development of Islam in our country. There, oddly enough, but so as it turns out, there was a brother who may assist him and assist us, named Abdurrahman, a brother that we call Hernan, who was a student in the University of Medina, who I also had the pleasure of meeting because he was around the body of Muslims in Asbury Park. And he was one of my first exposures to Medina University. And because grades were so good in school, throughout most of my academic career, the brothers that I was around, they told me that I would be a shoe-in for Medina University. And that was kind of my first hearing about it. And I met Abdurrahman at the time when he was studying there. He would come, had some exposures there. And then a few people who I became friends with eventually were in the University of Medina a year before I went in 1999. A brother by the name of Idris Abdullah and another brother by the name of Kashif Khan. We were all very close for a long period of time, especially in the mid to late 90s. They went before I went. And one year, Idris, he came back for the summer, and some of the professors visiting the States. And through Abdurrahman hosting them, but Idris as well hosting them because Idris knew the places to shop and all of that. And the two of them convinced these university professors and such, and they held some positions with and the acceptance of students and such to take some interviews. So we set up this mock interview station in Idris's mother's apartment, in a 2-bedroom apartment. And long story short, Malik Al-Akdar, he ends up translating for me. He's there, and he translates my interview for me. And a year later, I'm accepted in the university.
MashaAllah. Now you say some of the mashayikh came from Saudi to the States. This wasn't the lecture that took place in Philadelphia with Sheikh Saleh Suhaimi, was it? Or was this at another time?
This was a couple years prior to that.
Okay, okay. I was trying to remember what year that was. If I'm not mistaken, it was
I want to
2000.
say that. Go ahead. I want to say 2002-esque, perhaps.
No, it was the same
One
year
or
that
two.
Sheikh. It was the same year Sheikh Mukbil died because I remember Sheikh Dawood announced his death at the conference,
Then
and it was the
then that's,
same year. It was the same year, September 11th, but months prior to September 11th. I believe that was 2001, right?
you know what? That helps. You're right. So that's definitely the year 2001. And I'll tell you why. You're jogging my memory. Because I had the honor of meeting Shah not too long before he passed away in the hospitals in Jeddah. And I remember that summer during the conference, the Mashayikh did go to Philadelphia, but we also were able to bring Sheikh Abdullah Al Atiq to our area in Asbury Park for a lecture as well. And it was during Sheikh Abdullah Atiq's lecture that we got the news of the passing of Sheikh Mukbil rahimahullah. And that impacted me pretty heavily at the time because I had just met him and I had wanted to go to Yemen to study with him, but wasn't able to, ended up with Medina, and then, hearing of his passing not too long after I met him. So definitely 2001, you're correct.
No, no. Yeah, long time. Now, so um, for that, because you studied in Medina, there's a lot of brothers that aspire to study overseas and study specifically at one of the Islamic universities in the Memlaka. Because you studied there, let me ask this question before I ask the main question. When you got accepted and when you went, were you married?
Yes.
Maybe you can mention to us some of the struggles that you may have encountered being a married brother studying in the Islamic University in Medina.
Being broke. That was a struggle. But,
Sure
I definitely would say, and not that anyone could have done anything or said anything. All of us was so much. We were young at the time. When I first went to the university, I was 18 years old, And some of the other names that we mentioned or may not have mentioned earlier, these brothers are in their 20s at the time. At the time, they're just coming out of maybe their first round of studies in, Egypt or Yemen, whatever they were, and all pretty inexperienced in life, trying to figure it out. You know what I mean? But if we could have been better prepped for the reality of what studying is, what it is going to take, and what it is like having a family in a different country with a different culture. And for many of us, first starting off, on top of that, with a language barrier, that would have helped out a whole lot. And even if it's something as simple as the realization that perhaps you are going to study and you are dedicated to something, but that same dedication and that same motivation and drive may not be that of your spouse. Your spouse may be there supporting you, but that's not what they're there for. So now that you're there doing that, what are they supposed to do? With while you're out all this time and all these things. So um, better preparation, which I believe a lot of the brothers, and I'll say even sisters, have, who are traveling to study and things like that. It's much better now. There's a lot more information, especially with the internet and such. The internet was fairly new, when I went over it wasn't a lot of information like that. So that's the first thing that I will offer in that regard, being married.
You say better preparation.
Yes.
So better preparation in terms of what specifically are, yani, how they receive money, or in terms of what?
Knowing what to expect and knowing how to navigate once you get there. um, even some of the simple things, some of the things that we were doing at the time were not the best option. And I'll give you one example. So what many of us were doing at that time is that it wasn't like it is now. So it was somewhat challenging, not impossible, but somewhat challenging to get your wife there on a valid visa and with a residency card in Iqama. There were some challenges there with that. So what many of us would do, we have our student visa, so we can go, but we would find a way. I'll say it that way. We would find a way where our wife would come on an Umrah visa and then just stay. And of
Okay.
course, the visa runs out. You know, at that time, I remember whether, because they've changed it a few times, the visa was either 30 days or 90 days, something like that. And you're just living there. And for all intent purposes, I mean, illegal aliens, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that comes with a whole host of challenges and laws being broken and things that a more mature mindset or more prepared mindset wouldn't do. And of course, the university has a lot of support and a lot of respect from the people who were there. And a lot of the people, the locals, even some of the police officers knew us, had a lot of respect for people seeking knowledge and things like that. So eventually they just told us, because we're moving around, we're going to Jeddah shopping, we're going to make Umrah back and forth to Mecca. And some of them eventually kind of sent word back to us and told us that, listen, guys, we know you're here, we know your situation, we know why you're moving, how you're moving, but just keep it in Medina. Don't travel with your wives outside of Medina. That's going to create problems for us, and then we're going to have to do things that we may not want to do. So just keep it local, right? And so they work with us that way, But yeah, we weren't prepared for those type of things. And I think when we were older, more mature, or had people um, who were more experienced in life to kind of give us some direction in those areas, maybe some of the challenges that we would not have had. And even for what comes up at some point for many of us is that eventually your family may have to come back to the States while you're still there, and or up with family. and because you're married, um, you have to eventually, for many of us, make a decision whether I'm going to rough this out and stay married, um, or whether I'm not going to stay married, or whether I'm going to leave my studies and come back home. Right. So all these things are things that we had no idea would even exist before we went to go study, but they're very real life challenges, that at times can be obstacles in the path of knowledge. But if we're properly prepared, then of course the union and marriage and all that comes with the marriage should be assisting us in our studies and shouldn't become an obstacle.
Hey, now, hey, now. Now, I know that with you being in Baltimore currently, you're probably dealing with a lot of people on a lot of different levels. Are there young brothers that come to you seeking advice from you as it relates to studying overseas and how they should be prepared and thus forth and so on?
Most definitely, most definitely, and very frequently.
So I would imagine some brothers out of your community have gone overseas. Then, huh?
I would say over the years, over the years, there are a few brothers, and if I'm shy to mention some names, but there are a few brothers. We mentioned some names, maybe some of the names that we would be familiar with, but yes, yes.
Uh, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people would like to hear who were some of the mashayikh that you got a chance to meet and benefit with, and maybe you can share some. Like I'm pretty sure all of us who have been overseas have some type of stories with interactions with some mashayikh that were impactful on us in a positive way.
Mhm.
Maybe you could share some of those experiences with myself and the listening audience, inshallah.
Subhanallah. Well, in Medina, as you know, Medina is filled with scholarship. May Allah continue to preserve it. And there are lessons going on in the Prophet's Masjid, lessons that Mashaykh were teaching in their local masajid, some even inside of their home. Always more lessons than you couldn't attend all of them. So you have to make a choice. But you get exposure as much as you can. A certain sheikh may be teaching a certain book that you can sit for that particular book, or you may have some form of a private meeting or a lecture or just exposure. So try and get as much exposure as you can. But I definitely would say most consistently, and in this order, I was sitting with Sheikh Ali Nasser al-Qihi in the Prophet's Masjid, and thereafter Sheikh Ubaid al-Jabari, um, thereafter Sheikh Abdullah al-Bukhari, um, thereafter Sheikh Ibrahim. Those four, I would say, I was the most consistent with at that time. May Allah preserve all of them, but I was attempting to get as much exposure from any and everyone that I was able to at that time when opportunities would present themselves. Um, one one interesting story. I'll share this one. So Ibn Uthaymeen, the Imam, the Alama, may Allah bestow mercy upon his soul, he had a normal custom that every year, toward the end of the school year, he would come to um, Medina University and lecture with the students, and perhaps he would teach in the Prophet's Masjid and things of that nature. But as Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, he passes in the year 2000. And I happened to have been present at the very last lecture that he gave in the Haram in Mecca. I had made that cap that year, but um, I wasn't able to meet him. I wasn't able to meet him, rahimahullah, even though I was present when he gave that last lecture, but they had him kind of tucked away and broadcasted it out throughout the speaker system because he was so ill. But I say all this to say that because he didn't make it in the year 2000, due to passing, rahimahullah, this is when Sheikh Saleh, may Allah preserve him, continued that in Uthaymeen's stead. So that was the first year that Sheikh Saleh al-Fawzan came to Medina and lectured in the university and also taught in the Prophet's Masjid. So he taught Fadafatul Usul in the Prophet's Masjid that year. And I was present for those lessons. Some of the other brothers were present too that I mentioned earlier. Idris Abdullah was there. Kasha Khan was there as well. Mustafa George was also there as well. He was my neighbor in Medina for some years when I was there. But in any regard, the Sheikh teaches the book. And I don't know if you've been, I'm pretty sure you have. You've been to the Prophet's Masjid.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, of course, right?
Yeah.
So, after the lesson, the Sheikh gets up, and on the side, as you go through the marble walkway, you'll see some spaces for shoes, or sometimes you might see them like near the pillars. So, as normal, after the lesson, everyone's crowding the Sheikh, right? Trying to get questions in, trying to benefit from his character. We're just trying to be in his presence. So he's walking, hafidhahullah, and he goes to look where he left his sandals. Lo and behold, he gets a look on his face like, I know I put my sandals here. So then he starts looking elsewhere around as though maybe he forgot where he put them at. So his sandals weren't there. He's barefoot. So upon realizing what's taking place, all the students start taking their sandals and throwing them in front of the Sheikh. Sheikh Salih Fawzan refuses. And he walks barefoot, and the size of the masjid in the courtyard. He walks barefoot through the Prophet's method. He walks through the courtyard area where the white marble is at, we've seen in the pictures and all that. Keeps walking barefoot out into the souk area, to the market area, until he finds sandals. And in the midst of this, we're still crowded around him. And he tells us, he says, maybe you all should disperse. There's so many of you all, maybe people will think that's God, or they think that something bad happened. So, we have the lesson. We'll be back tomorrow. It's time for you all to disperse. So most of us did. We're young. So we acted as though we dispersed, but we continued to kind of step back and just watch the Sheikh. So he kept walking barefoot until he walked to purchase sandals. He purchased the sandals with his own money. And then he proceeds to walk back to the hotel he was staying in at the time, was the Green Palace. So, and we wanted to know where he was staying. So as he's walking up to the Green Palace, another brother, I believe, was with this as well at this point in the story. One of our British brothers, Mustafa Nesbith, may Allah preserve him. It's been years since I've seen him spoke to him. But in any regard, we see he's at the Green Palace, getting ready to walk into the door. So Mustafa George, myself, and Mustafa Nesbith, we pop up. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Salih Fawzan, Kayful Hal, whatever have you. So we walk in with the Sheikh into the hotel. And the Sheikh is very kind and very, very steady, very, very calm. Mustafa George, he's trying to throw some questions at him, and he does, and Sheikh Salih Fawzan is answering, and we're walking, we go into the elevator. So now it's just the three of us. We're in the elevator with Sheikh Salih Fawzan, and we think the Sheikh is going to let us go up and go into his room with him. So we're in the elevator, and we finally get to the Sheikh's floor, and he looks at us. He says, "Fi amanillah," walks off, and the doors close on us. Right? May Allah preserve the Sheikh. So that's my Sheikh Salih Fawzan story.
I heard something similar to the first part of that story where he searched for sandals and couldn't find them sandals, and people attempted to give him their pair, and he refused and walked off and bought his own pair.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that before. It may have been circulating online somewhere. But that particular story, it did. I did somehow it came to me that situation had taken place. Now, as it relates, we know that you have a lengthy experience as it pertains to dawah. When did you start participating in dawah efforts here in the States, and what were some of the places that you've been given dawah? Regardless if you were in a position of imam or a teacher or whatever the case may be.
Well, if we're going to say da'wah with a broad term like that, just education and an invitation, um, I would have to say 1998. Two come to mind in 98. One was I became a teacher in the school in this masjid in Asbury Park, in the Islamic Center of Asbury Park. They had a school, and that was actually one of the reasons why they opened up that masjid, was to establish a Muslim school at the time. So for what it was worth, it was small, small in its runs, but nevertheless, I was teaching there. And I would also add to this that in 1998, Freud was fresh. And a few of us got together, and our brother Adam Lazarus, our brother Kashif Khan, our brother well now Abu Abdus Salam Sadiq Gianni, and a few others who, if we mention their names, they would not be as known. But we got together and we established something that we called Wasila to Salafiyya at the, and the internet was fresh, just a couple years in. We wanted to establish a website and give da'wah on the website. And we didn't know how to do that. Internet is brand spanking new. But there was this website called Troy.org, and they seemed to really have it together. And in our minds, they had this massive organization running. So we got in contact with them, and we actually traveled up to Canada in 1998 to Toronto, met with the brothers in Troy, and made those connections there, and utilized what we learned from that to springboard Wasila to Salafiyya at the time and establish that website. So I would say starting off 1998 or so.
Okay. What were some of the places that you've participated in giving dawah?
Oh, that's a hard question.
Take your
Where
time.
haven't I been, right? Well, let's go stateside. So in terms of states, different places in New Jersey, different places in New York. I've been to Canada several times. Um, Going down the East Coast, let's just say going down the East Coast all the way down to South Carolina and states in between. I've been as far west as Texas up to Chicago, that area there. Also Seattle, Washington, and other towns in Seattle or in Washington as well, I should say. I remember Tacoma, being in Tacoma. I remember another area we went to called, I think it was called Olympia or Olympus, but several towns in Washington around Seattle as well. I've also been to Trinidad and Tobago a couple times. The first time that I went was with Sheikh Dawood Adib, may Allah preserve him. But those are the places that come to mind most immediately.
Now, when you say Seattle or Washington, Tacoma, Seattle, like this, were those for trips or were you residing in those areas for a specified amount of time?
Some of these places that I mentioned, I was residing for a period of time. Other places, they were trips. They were trips for the sake of dawah, where whether it be a weekend or a week or two, I'm working with the communities there.
Yeah, because I would imagine like when you're dealing with, well, we know when dealing with uh, the varying parts of the states, going from the South to the Midwest to the West Coast, back to the East Coast. Uh, the dynamics changed slightly. You may be dealing with social ills that are generally found everywhere, but then in those localities, you have people that are dealing with their specific issues as well. So,
Yeah.
uh, how do you know with you going from one place to another, from some of the places that you mentioned, how did you adapt to the audiences that you dealt with, from, say for instance, from being in New Jersey or New York, and then being in places like Tacoma, Washington, and Seattle, Washington, and even on down south to Texas? You were in Dallas, Texas, correct? No.
Yes, I was in the Dallas area, correct. Yeah, it was a learning process, and during the time that I was traveling the most was when I was the youngest, you know. So as much as people may have thought that they were benefiting from me, I would say that I was definitely benefiting from them much more. And the exposures, the different life circumstances, like you're speaking of, being in Massachusetts and being in Connecticut during the times that I was there, a very different dynamic from being in South Carolina, for example, right? Or even being in Durham, North Carolina, during the times that I was there. Um, but eventually, what you come to realize is that we're all human and people to people. You kind of eventually come to that realization. We may have nuances in the way that we express this, or the ways that we get to it, but it's kind of, it becomes kind of all the same, wash, rinse, repeat. And that's not to detract from any of the subcultures, because the subcultures, as you're alluding to, are definitely very different. And the more that I got involved with these communities, then there also becomes not just subcultural differences, but actual cultural differences, because some of these places, we're dealing with the indigenous community. So I mean by that, people of African descent, people of Latino descent, people of European descent, right? In some of those communities, but you end up in Arab communities, right? You end up in Eastern African communities, Somalian communities, and things like that. So their approach to life, their approach to Islam, the type of question that they have, the challenges that they're facing, are different than what you and I would have experienced growing up. You know,
Right.
so there's definitely an issue of relativity, right? Being able to relate to different cultures, some easier than others, but character does shine through. Character and mutual respect does shine through. And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what comes to my mind.
Yeah, no, no, it answers it, but I have a follow up question. That being,
Please.
uh, that being, what were some of the challenges that you faced, while giving dawah? And I know that these challenges may be many, especially dealing with different ethnicities, different cultures, different subcultures. So, what were some of the challenges that you faced? And I'm gonna add on to that question because we have brothers that are overseas studying, brothers who may be who at some point may see this interview and other interviews that have been held on this particular platform. With these challenges, that you're going to mention, what would be your advice, to people that are currently studying overseas, and it's expected that they will come back and be put, uh, in in front of a community, in the capacity of being a teacher, or or some in some seat for lack of better expressions, as it relates to dawah. So, what are some of the challenges that you face? What are some words that you would give to brothers that are coming back from overseas, how to best cope with challenges in communities, and basically what they should expect, being realistic in what they should expect? And before you answer that, I think that's really important because for brothers that are overseas studying, it, I, I don't want to say that. Well, maybe it is safe for me to say sometimes people romanticize dawah. They
Mhm.
don't have the correct perception when they come back in. A lot of times people think it's going to be easy. The road is going to be easy. I'm gonna come in, and the community is going to hold me down, and thus forth and so on. And uh, I can speak from my experiences. I know it's not like that, and I'm pretty sure your
Right.
experiences are similar to mine. So, what would you say in that regard as it relates to that question?
Well, the first thing that I was saying, we can follow this and see where it goes. The first thing that I would say, if I had to sum it up in one word, I would say transferability. Um, and here's what I mean by that. So, as you've experienced, when we are in the different countries that we are, and we're learning, we are undergoing an academic study of the faith. And whether we're in official or unofficial seminaries, whether we're under direct tutelage from scholarship that we've sat with, or not, we're learning academically, and the things that we are learning directly and immediately are not necessarily the things that are being asked of us when we get back here. So we then have to figure out, how do I transfer the skill set that I've built to match the needs of my people? So you studied a book in Aqida, a book in law. You studied a book in tafsir, whatever you may have been going through, and now, but when you get back here, now someone has trouble in their marriage and they're seeking marital counseling from you. Now someone has drug addiction challenges. Now there's fundraising that needs to be done. Now there's construction that needs to be done to the building. Now the taxes need to be paid on the building that we're own. Now we have to deal with the city with some things. These are all things that, these are not the things that we're taught, right? Yet we do have these skill sets from what we've learned. So we have to learn now how to apply those skill sets to the challenges that are in front of us. Issues of Islam in the workplace, and how do we find balance between those things, right? And and then once you enter into that line of thought, what many of us do, because we were taking the example of the scholars that we have learned from, and how we see Islam in the countries that we've been, whether it's in Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Yemen or wherever we've been. And what many of us then do, we take the culture of the people in the place where we were, and the solutions that they utilize there culturally with their challenges, and then we attempt to superimpose that upon our style and quality of life in America, and it doesn't always fit. I would venture to say that it seldom fits. So that puts in a space of now pioneering, where now we have to figure out, how do we take what we've learned about Islam, and the mentorship tutelage that we have accrued from scholarship, and make that fit into a model that works for Islam in America, where we may not have a precedent for that, in the way that some other countries may have, that may have history of hundreds of years of Islam where they can kind of look back to preceding generations and see how they dealt with issues and made certain things fit in certain time periods. We don't have that here, not in that level of depth. Um, this is a question to you to add on, but in my attempting to trace this back, after the transatlantic slave trade, barring that, I'm only able to trace Islam back through people that I've spoken to 1903. 1903. Maybe Islam was here before then, but that's as far as I was able to trace it back. So we're talking barely over 100 years, and even with that, is with limited information. It's only much more recently that we're getting this expansion of information and this constant flow of knowledge and being connected the way that we are now. They didn't have much of that then, you know. So transferability and pioneering. We have to be comfortable in that space. And for those who are going to learn and will eventually be coming back, we have to understand that reality. And we also have to understand the reality that we have to grow beyond, I'm going to go and study for X period of time, or I'm going to go to this university and graduate. And then when I come back, there's going to be a job waiting for me as the imam of Masjid X. That's not really a reality for many of us. And the skill sets that we've built, yes, can work inside of the role as an imam of a masjid, but it can also expand outside of that too. So we have to learn to not limit ourselves and find our proper grooves in society and find ways that we can contribute. Some of us, it may be through authoring. Others, it may be through some form of information center that may not necessarily be a masjid. Others may get involved in academia and become professors, teaching us that way. Whatever it may be. Others may leverage their seminary tutelage into pastoral care and building that skill set, right? But it doesn't have to be limited to the choices of either I'm going to be the imam of the masjid or I'm going to be driving a truck, right? It doesn't have to be that limited, and Allah knows best.
No, I definitely would agree. I definitely would agree with that. And sometimes this is we're just dealing with that point. I think that sometimes that brothers while overseas can be a little disconnected from what's going on here. And what I mean when I say that is really just emphasizing the point that you made previously, because now we know of issues that are taking place in the states because we come from the states. So we know of issues that are taking place in the states, but when we go overseas, we kind of look at how how things are being handled for that particular circumstance, the particular circumstance overseas, and it
Mm-hmm.
works for that particular circumstance. But then when we come back, we try to apply the remedy for that particular circumstance that was overseas to a circumstance that's differing with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what I mean when I say sometimes I believe that we could be a little out of touch. And I can actually give examples of things like that took place in the States, in LA, and in other places where things were dealt with a certain way overseas, but because it was appropriate for the circumstance overseas, but not exactly appropriate for the circumstance here. And I think
Right.
that one of the vital um, knowledge aspects of knowledge that helps a person transfer those skills to what a person is dealing with in the circumstances that they're dealing with here in the States is qawaid al-fiqh.
Yes.
You know, going into those principles and applying those principles as it relates to the circumstance that they're faced with right in front of them,
Mhm.
instead of doing things a certain way it was done somewhere else that has a slightly different circumstance than the circumstance that they're
Mhm.
coming into. This is what
Right.
I mean when I say that sometimes we can be a little bit out of touch. And I say, and I'm not pointing the fingers at anybody. I say myself first and foremost. I believe when I
Sure.
came back from overseas, I was a little out of touch. I was a little out
Yeah,
of touch. Took some
I agree
time to
with you.
get.
I agree.
It took some time to get
Me too.
back in the mix of things.
Mm.
And even some of the things that uh, one particular thing that you just made mention of as it relates to brothers having the expectation of coming back and being an imam of a masjid. Sorry for the brothers that may be listening that are studying overseas. Hate to burst your bubble, but sometimes it's not always like that because you're finding difficulty in being able to provide for your family, especially when you're depending on a community to get on back if you and support you, and the community itself is struggling with other issues. They're struggling to make sure that the lights are stay on in the masjid, and thus forth and so on. So I think that one of the things that the brothers have to do is have to have a mindset of being independent with their dawah as it relates to yeah, being independent in the sense that don't expect that this ready-made situation will be waiting for you when you come back, and Allah knows best. Um,
And I would add to that, to your point that you mentioned about al-qawaid al-fiqhiyya, about maxims of jurisprudence and usul fiqh and legal theory. What comes to mind is the the principle al-ibra bi-umum al-lafz la bi khusus al-sabab, that the lesson is taken from the general example and necessarily the specific reason or cause, or the particular occurrence. And even though we utilize this particular principle in tafsir, for example, in exegesis, or in our dealings in fiqh, in our dealings in jurisprudence, just to take that thought a bit further, and we may have to look at not necessarily the specific thing that the sheikh said or done in a specific situation, but we may have to learn to take concept or the methodology of the teacher and then learn how to apply that method or that concept to our situation, even if it is not the same exact way, so that we're in alignment with the tools that the scholars have given us in order to navigate through our societies.
um, Let me see. I think
We've been chatting for a while.
give me 1 second. I think I just okay. So anyway, the next question would be, what are some of the goals related to Dawah that you are currently striving to accomplish?
I would say two things, and I probably have to unpack at least one of them.
Mm-hmm.
One is higher life quality, and the second is thought process. Um, and what I mean by that is, well, as far as high quality of life, I think we can explain this simply enough. We have five pillars in our faith, but many of us are not five pillar Muslims. Um, Many of us, we get into the first pillar, the Shahadatain, the two testimonies. We get into Salah. We get into fasting. But when it comes to zakat, the annual almsgiving, when it comes to Hajj, the major pilgrimage, we fall short. A lot of us are really 2 to 3 pillar Muslims and not 5 pillar Muslims. With everything that it will require us to fulfill those 5 pillars. Like for example, in order to pay zakat, if we have to have a certain amount of wealth, the nisab, and then a year passes on that wealth before we pay zakat on it, um, that means we have to have a level of financial IQ. That means we have to have some stability in our jobs or our incomes. Um, we have to know how to handle grow money in order to be able to do that. For example, if we're talking about making Hajj, now we're talking about finance and our bodies having the ability to carry out what's required of us in Hajj. So just higher life quality, definitely a push for that, and our thought processes. What I mean by that is a push to not necessarily teach people what to think, but teaching people how to think. How do we understand Islam properly? What are the concepts and principles and methodologies of the faith, so that we can begin to live Islam without every big or small scenario needing someone to tell us what to do, right? Because as the verse mentions, "Fas'alu ahla dhikri in kuntum la ta'lamun." Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. And as some scholars have explained the verse, it doesn't mean to ask when you do know. It means to ask when you don't. So we need to begin to build ourselves into a space that we do know, so that we can begin to function better um, in the societies that we live in. It's a more holistic um, lifestyle where Islam is our life. Our life. Islam is not just when we're at the masjid. Islam is not just when we're around the brothers or the sisters. And we live in a society where there are non-Muslims, where there are Muslims who are not practicing to the best of their ability, to the best of their potential. So how do we live and navigate through all of that, right? So those 2 things is what I would say, if that makes sense at all.
No, no, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And lastly, um, in concluding this interview, I usually give the person being interviewed the floor to make any last words. If you have any last words for the people that are listening to the broadcast now, then you have the opportunity to do so.
Well, my first and my immediate words are actually to you. I appreciate the opportunity in being here, and it's been a good interview, a good experience. I'll be honest in that I actually had an intent of asking you just as many questions you were asking me, but you're so good in your interview that I wasn't able to get to that part, huh? So maybe next time I'll interview you. May Allah preserve you. But no, for anyone who needs to connect with me or reach out to me in any way, I'm currently most active at Masjid Hassan in Baltimore, Maryland, 3723 Gwen Oak Avenue, 21207. Beyond that, my website is available. You can find me there, aqilingram.com, AQILINGRAM. And whatever I can do to serve, I'm around. I'm not too hard to
uh,
find.
you have an organization, correct? Was it Orida or something to this effect?
Oh, Rita, yes, yes, yeah. So many different things that we've been in. So yes, for a time, there was a function we were running called Rita, regional dawah activity, and it's not as active as it was, but the idea at the time, we were there was a time in that we're concluding, so I'll be brief with this, but there was a time when we thought that we had to travel everywhere to give dawah. The natural evolution of that was that we then needed to come into a community and build out a community and build people up, as opposed to just a weekend event that comes and goes. For a period, that mindset then graduated into the idea of we don't necessarily, or we shouldn't necessarily be limited to just one physical structure, but if we're able to touch an entire region, then we should do so. And during that time where Rita was most active, we were reaching out to the DMV broadly, as opposed to one or two Islamic centers. The DMV, again, DC, Maryland, Northern Virginia area, and at its height, I believe there were close to 15 different Islamic centers that we were working with at the time. But now we're kind of back to being concentrated on one or two places.
That definitely sounds like a good idea. Um, yeah, definitely, that, especially considering the fact that the Dow was needed, especially, but really all throughout the U.S. The U.S. is a big country, right? But anyway, with that, we'll close out. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. To the brothers and sisters that were listening to the broadcast, and I leave you with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.